never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life.
Good morning, Matt. Light shines once again upon us in the frozen north, the Dale of Icewind. We
have
free.
Come to the land of ice and snow.
That's right.
With the midnight sun, where
right.
our hearts do glow.
Actually, this is a great point. I want to get right into this. Hello, everyone. This is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob. But, like, my favorite, before we even talk about the book, my favorite thing about this book, which is what we're reviewing and talking about today, Rime of the Frostmaiden, is it sounds like a fucking sweet-ass metal song. And I want somebody to record Rime of the Frostmaiden if they haven't already. Somebody get, I don't know, Nightwish on the line and tell them that I have a request.
Please give us some sweet licks and one of the...
Yeah. So yeah, that's this is the most recent release from Wizards of the Coast, a book. This is it is an adventure, or a series of adventures.
It's a hefty tome. I have the D&D Beyond version, but I think the hardback clocks in at over 300 pages.
Yeah, I also have the D&D
module.
Beyond version, but this is, before anything else, this is a substantive tome. It is. Right. There's a lot going on here. We spend most of our time on this podcast griping about what Wizards does, and in the past, books that we liked, books like Ghosts of Saltmarsh, for example, were good, but they were a little light on content or repurposed content. Again, similar, I think, was Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which I loved, but again was in a lot of ways kind of light. This is not light. There is a lot of stuff in this book. We'll get into the details, but it is a substantial amount of monsters, adventures, locations, maps, NPCs, quests, magic items. It's got it all, folks.
If your dungeon master might play this, we try and keep these reviews a little unspoilerly at the beginning, and I think if you don't want spoilers, one of the interesting things about this is this one might be the most chunkable, dissectable, vivisectionable adventures. You can cut out parts of this one, I think, fairly easy. And there's lots of parts.
For sure. Aside from the ones that are actually just collections of independent adventures like Ghosts of Saltmarsh or Tales of the Yawning Portal, this is probably the book that it is so easy. You can actually, probably every section of this, you can just grab and transport, sometimes like wholesale, from one place to another to use in your own adventure or to slip into a different published adventure. This is, from a design standpoint, one of the ones that it is easiest to steal or, as Matt said, vivisect, chop bits out of, or cut things to run in Rime of the Frostmaiden, or cut things out to run in a different thing. Yeah, this is the book that, if you want to steal from, but not necessarily run in its entirety, it is the easiest. It is built to do so, which is cool. I'm a fan of.
Absolutely. This adventure also has a substantial and many brand new writers and designers. Well, Chris Perkins is our lead designer. The writing team is Stacey Allen, Bill Binham, H.H. Carlin, Celeste Conowitch, Dan Dillon, Will Doyle, Michaela Ebel,
shout out,
Gergeson, Chad Quant, Morgana Robbins, and Ashley Warren.
Yeah, and this is, I believe, a writing team of entirely new writers, right? These are all new to Wizards, right?
Except for the Wizards full-timers like Dan Dillon or Chris Perkins. There's a lot of new people, but not all of these people are new. I know, for example, Ashley Warren has written many, many, many modules, none officially for Wizards, though.
This is a fresh-faced crew approaching sort of an entirely new... there's a lot about this adventure that is unprecedented or new or a fresh take. So it is not only that the people writing it are new and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but also that there's a lot about this adventure which is a departure from previous Wizards of the Coast's books. And
without getting into spoilers, what's sort of the biggest? I think the biggest thing is kind of structural.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing that I think. There's a lot of new stuff here, but the biggest thing I think that this book does that's different is the way that it structures the adventure. And this to me is really interesting, and there are things to recommend it and there are things to not recommend it. But it sort of strikes a middle ground between the completely free-form sort of hex crawl that you might get in Kingmaker, for example, and the adventure on rails that you find in a lot of Wizards adventures.
I don't want any of our old school listeners to get excited. There are no hexes. Sorry.
Right, sorry. I only mean that it is...
To its detriment, I think, actually.
I actually think it would benefit from some hexes, but and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it is free form in a lot of ways and unstructured, especially at the beginning, but not so again not so like completely free form as Kingmaker or an old school hex crawl adventure, which is either something that you're excited about or something that you're not excited about. I think this is an easy entry into the more sandboxy type of adventure for players that may not be experienced with it already. But there are players may also just be able to handle a sandbox, which might have been a slightly better approach for the beginning of this. But structurally, this is a totally new approach or totally different from what Wizards has done before. And frankly, I'm here for it.
Yeah, I'm here for it too. It's ambitious in the way that I think I would like to see. I would also say, again, without spoilers, it does something we haven't seen in a while from Wizards, which is instead of an urban adventure or a wilderness adventure, we have a bunch of really fun small towns. That's not too much spoilers. And if players, it's a chance for players to become the most important people in an entire region of the world. So if that's something you want to do, that will happen in this game.
Yeah,
or they'll die trying. Because this is also a very deadly adventure.
It is a very deadly adventure. Jesus. I would also say that this might not be entirely true, but this is one of the more thematically cohesive adventures. There's a lot of different like actual sub quests and adventures within it, but it feels like it's all part of the same region, story, atmosphere, right? It's goofy and it's funny, but it's also there's a lot of horror, and you are in a frozen wasteland, and even the places that have civilization are still pretty isolated. And some of the other adventures can really like bounce around from field to field, but this has a cohesion to it that I think is pretty good. I think that it sticks to the theme all the way through, which is pretty cool, despite that it ranges across an awful lot of territory, both actual and sort of metaphorical.
I think the theme can best be expressed not through my description, but through song from the immortal play from 2001, Bring It On. Brr, it's cold in here. There must be some eldritch horrors in the atmosphere. I said, brr. Okay, I'm done.
That's exactly right. So what else do we want to say about this broadly before we get into specifics? Because I do want to get into specifics, but what else can we say that's spoiler-free
without spoilers,
about this?
I will say, again, the strength of this adventure is, I think, if it's well run, it allows for a lot of player agency in how to tackle problems. How those problems are presented in the adventure is fucked up. There's a lot of mistakes and ways that I would not present sort of a sandbox to players. So there's a lot of mistakes in that, in my opinion. So that's kind of a downside for me.
I guess. What do you want to just do, like pros and cons here? You just kind of did that. Let's just do broad.
That was a pro and con.
We'll do some broad pros and cons. So if you are thinking about running this or thinking about playing in this, you can listen and make your own decisions. And then if you are not going to be a player in this, listen to the rest of the episode for a more thorough review. My first, I guess, pro and con is pro. I think that there is just a ton of super awesome and interesting information in here and a lot of things to play with. My con is kind of the same as Matt's in that it's not always very well combined or stitched together. The sinews of this adventure are sometimes pretty weak.
My another similar pro is that the parts of this adventure, right, are really useful. If you wanted to start this adventure at first level, you can do that. If you also wanted your players to show up in Icewind Dale at 4th or 5th level and just do the second half, you can do that. The con of those is both of those sort of how to get players started or hook them in. I think there are some issues.
My second pro is that, honestly, not every part of this book is equally good, but I don't really think there are any stinkers here. I like just about every section and all of the quests, large and small, at least a little bit, which is pretty impressive. There's nothing that I'm super this sucks, I don't care about it. The con is, again, also that that's actually a lot of information for you to deal with as a DM. And you may struggle to run all of these sections effectively, and it may be hard for you to... You're probably not going to be able to touch on all of the quests and sublocations in this book, which is fine, but it's sort of up to you to pick and choose or to guide your players, which is, again, fine, but it is extra work for the DM.
This adventure, I think, is more work for a dungeon master than, let's say, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, in my opinion, in the way I would plan it out and run it. However, that's the kind of work I would like to do, so I don't know if that's really a con for me.
This reminds me a lot of Curse of Strahd, where you have all of the information, but as a DM, you have a lot of work to do to put it together and guide your players in a certain way, and you have to really read a lot and be prepared because there's no set path through the adventure, which
Here's
is
all that I want, Rob, is a map of a concept map of bubbles of all of the 10 towns, all of the quests, all of the locations outside of the 10 towns, and what quests and NPCs link each one.
Yeah.
I just need some enterprising fan out there to make that for me.
What's your buy, not buy, but, broadly, if you don't want to get into specifics?
I would buy this. I'm happy I bought this. But again, I come from the place of I like reading adventures. I think I'm still happy I bought this because I'm going to steal some things. So
this is a 100% buy for me. I had the same problems as Matt, but also I loved reading every section of this. I got so many ideas. There's so many things I could steal. There's cool monsters, cool magic items, a couple of new spells. This was highly worth it, in my opinion. I loved this. I would probably not run this adventure exactly as written, but for me, a relatively experienced DM who loves to get ideas from stuff like this, this is probably actually one of my top Wizards books at this point. I got more out of this than I have out of any of their published adventures in a long time. So strong recommendation from me. Be warned that it's got some... You're going to have to do some work. So that I think this... I would definitely say this is not a beginner's DM or beginner DM's book. I would veer away from this if you are just starting out, and definitely don't run this as your first adventure. But if you're willing to put a little bit of extra legwork in, there's a lot to be gained from this book.
I would counter that with, if you ran it right, this is the type of adventure that I think beginner DMs should be running. Sort of an open-ended, let players have fun and explore and confront threats. I think there's a lot here that makes that difficult for beginners DMs. So I agree with you on that. To compare this to Descent to Avernus, we decided had a terrible opening set of quests and then was super awesome once things finally got to hell. This one doesn't have a terrible opening quests. However, they're presented in a way that is incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
And then instead of one big main quest at the end, there's a lot of other, exciting quests, and I love that. I'm fine with having an adventure that isn't all about just defeating one big bad. Oh, there are big bads, but there's more to your story than just that.
Yeah. So here,
spoilers time.
So if you are planning on, if you might play in this, or your DM might buy it, or you just don't want to be spoiled, this is the part where you depart. And from here on out, we'll be talking about the specific elements of this adventure and what we liked and what we didn't like. And so be warned, here there be spoilers.
Cue that heavy metal music.
All right, Matt. So what is in this book?
Okay, I'm going to give you in less than 60 seconds what you're getting. You get a very short section on how to start the adventure. You get a description of each of the 10 towns of Icewind Dale, a frozen, where it's always winter, never Christmas region of the Sword Coast, north of Waterdeep, north of Neverwinter, north of even Luskan. You then get a series of interesting locations outside of the 10 towns, sort of a second tier of adventure. And then you get kind of 4 big set piece adventures that are for the highest level, dealing with an evil Drugar who wants to conquer Icewind Dale, his giant destructive dragon, the Frostmaiden herself, who keeps Icewind Dale forever locked in winter, and a hidden Netherese city in the glaciers.
That's exactly it. And so the central conceit of this adventure is that Icewind Dale has been plunged into an eternal winter by the White Witch. I'm sorry, by Oril, the...
It's always winter and never Christmas.
By Oril, the lesser god of, I don't know, ice and snow and darkness and misery. Not anybody I'm familiar with, but I'm sure this is somewhere in Forgotten Realms lore. You find out... Actually, well, we can get to this later. I'm not sure that you ever find out why she has decided to plunge Icewind Dale into an eternal winter, but it takes a great deal of her power, and she has to fly out and shield the sun. So there's a cool bit going on here that, again, requires kind of work from you as a DM. But the sun never rises in Icewind Dale during the entirety of this adventure, and so that means it's always dim light. If you, for example, happen to encounter something that's has dark vision or is sunlight sensitive, they have an advantage, like Durgar or vampires or drow, things like that. What was that vampire movie? 28 Days of Night or something like
30 Days of Night.
30 Days of Night.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, you can totally see the horror influence in this book, which I love. Obviously, The Thing.
I mean, it's very dark from the beginning. The players may arrive at a town that is doing human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning.
There's a little bit of an introduction to Icewind Dale, not a huge one, but I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. I got what I wanted, right, to know about Icewind Dale, and then as you read more, you definitely get a good feel for the region.
And a shout out to Janelle Jacquet, one of the original great module and sourcebook writers for TSR back in the day, and her description of Icewind Dale in Savage Frontier, a book from 30 years ago, did the great groundwork of making Icewind Dale a super interesting place to tell stories in.
So I guess let's just get right into the
let's talk about what introductory materials maybe the DM is given in the introduction.
So I like this. I really actually liked the introduction a lot. There's an adventure summary, and you're presented with 3 sort of like overarching, I guess, plots or problems, and these are that there's a Duragar that's Zardarok Sunblight, pretty rad name, who's trying to build a dragon out of Chardalin, which is a ice metal from an evil wizard. It's cool.
It's brutal. He's metal. He's blacker than the blackest black times 1,000.
Yeah. There's also a crashed Netherese necropolis, a flying city somewhere under the ice. And then, of course, there's Auril, who is a horrible, witch ice goddess who has, turned this into a realm of darkness and misery. And so these 3 things are sort of like interrelated, or that's how they're presented. And then you're given just a little bit of info on the maps and the Forgotten Realms. And then I do like that they've got a bit of a section on an adventure flow, and they've included an adventure flowchart, which is not super detailed, but this is something that other adventures have failed to include. And so I'm glad that they included it because it is helpful.
But the problem is in the first part of the adventure, which we'll get in when we talk about the first part of the adventure, there's all these different ways players can go, and I can see one of the easiest things for a dungeon master to mess up is players, there's 10 towns, right? That's a lot to keep track of. Show up at a town, and there's a plot hook that will tell them about another place to go, and you would completely forget about it.
Oh, for sure. So let's get to the thing, right?
Well, the one other thing that was in this first section is stuff about cold weather and survival.
Yeah.
Now,
and I like this.
This is great. However, 5th edition has once again fucked us over.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 5th edition, if you buy cold weather clothing, rules as written, you are immune to all of the effects that are set out here. Cold weather clothing costs $10 or 10 gold. So,
yeah.
Sorry. Here's fun. You can make horror and survival fun, but your players could also spend $10 to buy some furs.
Well, and this is both cool and also, like, exactly what Matt says, kind of annoying. But all of the art, or almost all the art, has the characters in this sort of cold weather gear. Like you might see the people at a far northern isolated research station fleeing from a horrible body inhabiting creature wear, and which is cool and good. But the thing is that, if you wear that, none of this shit matters. Which is the major problem with 5th edition and environment rules in general. But whatever.
Right. This is a great idea. 5th edition environmental rules screw this over. So you can't do it. There's also the idea of character secrets presented here.
Which
like
I liked them. And I can see this going either way. This isn't like a new idea, and I could take them or leave them, but I liked some of them more than I liked others. And what I would do is I would present them to the players and be like, hey, do you want a secret? And then have them roll on the table. I don't know that every player needs to have one. I don't know that it's super important. I felt like they were integrated pretty well into the adventure. I guess I would have put this as an optional rule, which I guess it sort of is. But, it kind of depends on your players and your group. But I thought some of these were fun. And I guess, like, some of them are, like, really, like, great, but also disruptive in a way that I find kind of entertaining. Like, one of them is you've been implanted with a slod, like, larva, and it can burst out of your chest at any time, which is awesome, but also kind of just like such a thing that would, like, fuck up the game if your player isn't, like, 100% on board. And others, like, having an
Drizzt fan, like,
I thought that was funny.
I met Drizzt, and all I got was this stupid T-shirt. I guess, your secret. So maybe it's a more comedy one.
Yeah, so some of these are, like, goofier than others. Some of them are, like pretty ordinary. Like you've got like a romantic past with somebody in 10 towns. One of them is you're like a doppelganger. This is really annoying. I would probably not use this one, but I don't know.
Yeah. Here's the question is, so you could set up the party like this where they all have different unrelated secrets. And that brings us to the question of a session 0 for this campaign module. And I think the first big flaw I have here is there isn't a lot of advice, especially for new dungeon masters, on how to, like, why are the player characters here? Are they from the 10 towns? Why are they a party? Why are they so interested in doing the quests? Like, the adventure assumes that the player characters are invested in the 10 towns and want to, at the very least, help the 10 towns, at the greatest, stop the endless winter, right? And coming up with a hook for a party that works together, that wants to do that, is something you can do, and something I'm sure your players will have ideas on. It's something the module gives you 0 advice on.
Yeah. Which is, it sort of blew me away. I was looking for the section. I was like, oh, why are your characters here? Did they, option 1, they're all travelers from Neverwinter. Option 2, they're, they come up with it themselves. Option 3, native sons, Yeah. So this is up to you and your players to find a reason why they give a shit about it. They probably should have given you some hooks, and they didn't, which, I don't know. The hooks in previous adventures have been kind of contrived and sort of annoying, but you should have some, like, you were hired to go to Icewind Dale, or, you have relatives in the area, or, I don't know, any number of things. You can come up with these, but Matt is right that it is weird that you're not given any hooks to begin with to get your players to come here and to give them a reason to care.
Yeah. Okay. So should we move on to chapter 1, the 10 towns? This is an interesting chapter. I got a lot of problems with it, but I appreciate where it was trying to go.
This to me is super interesting. I thought it was very ambitious, and I liked it a lot.
The basic idea is, of course, there are 10 towns in Icewind Dale, all hard-scrabble frontier settlements, some bigger than others. Each one has at least one adventure quest, plus you can give your players a starting quest to get them to explore the 10 towns.
This I was very impressed by. I thought every one of the quests was worthwhile and interesting, some more than others, but there was a great variety of social quests, exploration quests, straight up kill this thing quests.
Here's a dungeon.
A lot of dungeons. This was a very rich in content section. There are 10 towns, NPCs, locations, quests, all sorts of shit. Very, very, a lot here that you could just easily borrow. However, what's the major, I would love to talk about a lot of this in more detail. I don't know that we have time, but like, what's the major problem with this section, Matt? Okay, well, so I'm sure we agree on this. I just like, I want to hear it because I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you're going to say, and you're right.
Right. The major problem is that it doesn't encourage players to like deal with all of the things at once and then make a decision as to where to go. It sort of tries to like make it in a like do this one, and then if you end up at this town, you'll go to this next one. I don't know. I just had a big problem with how it was presented. Each quest in each town often read like players show up, and then instead of them, investigating around, it's like someone shows up and is like, hello, I have an exclamation mark over my head. I'd like to hire you to escort a shipment of iron ingots. It's like, is that how things work? And it's very MMO.
It is a little MMO, and this is, again, there are things about this that I like and don't like, but the DM is encouraged to just roll on a D10 table and be like, great, you're in East Haven. And then based on,
Right, as you pick a starting town, right? You could start at any of the towns.
Yeah. And again, good and
some
bad,
are maybe
but
not good to start in.
So some are better than others. You have these two broader quests that encourage players to like go around. Either you're hunting a serial killer or you're trying to track down these nature spirits which are causing problems.
Can we talk about those? The two
Sure.
starting quests,
Sure.
the serial killer and the tiny fairy quest. I love the tiny fairy quest, right? It's, I think, a great starting thing. You've got cute little Studio Ghibli fairies that are constantly, I don't know, trying to prepare pine cones.
Yeah, they're very
cutlery.
Spirited Away. They're like little like mischievous goofballs that like to collect things and make friends, and you gotta track them down and talk to them and figure out what they're up to, and it's a nice like easy introduction,
right?
Low stakes but very very interesting, and
the
a
book
good
says
intro. Yeah,
pick one of these, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't give your players both. Like,
right?
There's not. It's sort of mind blowing because I'm like, authors of this book, did you forget that players can, you don't have a limit of one active quest in the game Dungeons and Dragons? We upgraded that like a while ago in patch 2.7, right? You can have as many active quests as you want. And players can decide which one they want to pick. The first starting quest, Cold-Hearted Killer, is one that drove me crazy because it's a great idea.
Yeah, this is exactly. I love a serial killer. If you listen to this podcast, whenever we're talking about things that I love like a murder mystery, and I love players having to track down a murderer. What was crazy about this one, and Matt, I don't know what bothered you, but like
two things. But go ahead.
But what bothered me was that like somebody is like, hey, somebody's killing people. Can you help me find them? Which is totally fine. They can't do it themselves. It didn't bother me. It didn't feel like too MMO-y. But then they're like, I think it's this person. And then you go, and it is that person. Like, there's like no... there's no like investigation or mystery. You just like go and like you happen to like run across this dude who your initial contact is like, I think this person is the murderer,
right?
And then they are the murderer, and then you just like fight them.
That was my first problem. You fight them, and also you shouldn't fight them. If you gave this to your players as their starting quest, they might be really keen on doing this before anything else, and they shouldn't, because the murderer has 75 hit points and will destroy your player characters until they're at least level 3.
Right. And also has like regeneration and like hits like a truck with 2 weapons. This guy will absolutely murder somebody in the first round.
But the bigger problem is, right, that this is a perfect opportunity for an investigation, and he's a serial killer in service of the Frostmaiden, right? And he's demanding sacrifices from this town. But there's nothing about, like, I would expect the mystery. So a couple of the towns are doing human sacrifice to try and appease the gods or the goddess.
Oh, right. So like,
and some aren't. And there's nothing about like, oh, he's targeting the towns that aren't doing human sacrifice.
No.
There's no follow up on the human sacrifice.
The thing is, what he's doing. This is actually really cool. Is people in the towns that do human sacrifice, some of them are paying off the leaders so they avoid being the sacrifice, and so he is taking the lives that Auril was denied. This is cool. This is a cool like sub,
and the players need to investigate and find that out.
But exactly, you're exactly right, Matt. One, you could totally kill this guy and never find that out. And 2, once you do kill or capture or defeat him, that's it. Like there's no like deeper thing here, which is too bad because this is like
because you could tie this into a plot of, oh hey, we can stop the human sacrifice now. Auril doesn't have an enforcer anymore or something like that.
Yeah, and if your players are like, I don't like human sacrifice. How do we stop it from happening? You're given you're given like nothing. I don't know. A missed opportunity, I think, is my biggest problem with this quest, which has a really cool like center bit, and it just is not followed up on.
Yeah, there's a pattern. It's in towns that you described, and it's towns visited by this shady merchant Torg, or Torga, right? So there's a pattern the players can figure out, right? And if we just had some clues on how to help them find it, would be much more interesting than some old person being like, players, here's the serial killer. Go find Ted Bundy and kill him.
Yep.
Also, just a minor quibble. Torg, the serial killer, works for this merchant shop. Torg has an outdoor trading shop. Torg's goods are stolen or fenced, and she sells them for double the normal price. Do you notice anything wrong with that, Rob? Have you ever been like, I'd like to buy goods. I know they're stolen. That's why I'm willing to pay extra.
Listen, she's got a perfect... she's got the market cornered, Matt. She can charge whatever she wants, and also steal the things that I don't know.
If you ever bought cigarettes from the mob, they sell them for much less than normal because they stole the truck they came on. Anyway, there's a lot of little things in this. There's a lot of economic problems in this adventure that I feel like only assholes like me notice, and it makes them bad.
It's the economics of 10 towns in a frozen wasteland. There's a lot of questions there, but we'll leave that aside.
The one other thing I wanted to talk about in the starting section was the leveling system in this adventure, which I like, and the reputation system, which completely undeveloped.
Oh God, I completely even forgot about the reputation system, so I wasn't even going to mention it.
Yeah, they introduce a reputation system and then don't tell you anything else about it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Just cut this paragraph if you're not going to tell us anything about it. Also, in character advancement, it says once the characters reach 4th level, they no long gain levels by completing quests in this chapter.
Yeah, there's a. I'm not going to call out any copy editing errors, but there.
Well,
I'm
the asshole. I'm the bad cop here.
There are several, and whatever. Who cares? I do want to call out some examples of good writing that I was very impressed by, or clever writing. Specifically, the section that starts this adventure is called Cold Open. I liked that. That was clever. I laughed. Thank you very much for your cleverness, authors of Rime of the Frostmaiden. Anyway,
now,
I really like the 10 towns section. Each of the 10 towns I actually read. All of them felt like similar, but a little different. They had a cool quest. One thing that I love...
Some of the quests were really great, right?
Yeah.
Some, like the plesiosaur fishing one, were like, why is the...
Are you kidding me? I love the plesiosaur fishing one.
All right, tell me why you love the plesiosaur fishing one.
Because it's an awakened plesiosaur. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of awakened plesiosaurs, but let me point something out to
I like
you,
a talking dinosaur, okay? Look, okay. I'm sorry. Excuse me for liking a talking dinosaur.
Okay, the players have to deal with a talking dinosaur that's disrupting local fishermen. They scout the lake. They roll a d20 when they scout the lake.
Oh, okay, so... To be fair, your players will fail this quest. That's the main problem. Is that it's you're not given any tools. I just like the awakened plesiosaur.
Right. There's a lot of things that are like this in this that are like this is a great conceptual idea. If you had the audacity to run the quest as written, your players would have a really bad time. There's a 1 in 4 chance that every hour they encounter the plesiosaur, and then once they encounter it, there's a 1 in 3 chance the plesiosaur just leaves, or so it's like there's
even if the plesiosaur attacks or approaches, it requires your players to want to or try to talk to it in order for you to
how would they know to do that?
Right. They wouldn't. Again, some players are going to try to talk to everything, but unless you have one of those groups, they might just kill it or fight it and never know that it was an awakened talking dinosaur that, a frost druid awakened to harass fishermen.
Yeah.
And
there are a lot of awakened creatures in this.
Which,
and
by the way,
it makes sense. There's frost druids who are going around awakening
which
things.
I think is fucking great and often hilarious. And I actually like this sort of like through line in the adventure. However, Matt is correct that the Awakened Plesiosaur quest is just going to be a pain in the ass and probably not work.
The other thing I want to mention about how these towns are set up is a lot of the way the quests are started is a little awkward. It's like the players arrive in town and someone runs up to them and is like, please, do my quest, right? There's also a rumor table, which is just the quests. And then all of the rumors about things outside of the 10 towns are gate kept by this reputation or level system. And I think one of the advantages of this kind of sandbox adventure, right, is you can throw more things at your players than they can ever deal with or want to deal with or can handle at this level, right? Plus, you give them just world-building tidbits. You give them quests or rumors that are false or untrue or partially true, right? That lead them to other places. This is a thing Dungeons and Dragons modules have been doing forever, but the tables
if you want,
we get here
if you want an
are
example
just
of
the
this,
quests.
is Dungeon of the Mad Mage does this very well. It has a huge rumors and tidbits section, which half of which are true, half of which are partially true. Some of are very like accurate, but it's, you know, it doesn't, it's not like just like, here are the things exactly that you should do. This is a missed opportunity.
So are we on to chapter 2?
Let's talk about chapter 2.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
I think this like suffers from many of the same problems as chapter 1. It has
Lack of a hex map. Please. This gives us so many interesting like wilderness rules.
Sorry,
of
Matt,
course,
we're getting ahead of ourselves. What is in chapter 2?
Chapter 2 is basically a thing that's like your players have reached a level of reputation in the town that people are willing to share with them bigger problems that extend outside the town. It's a chance for them to really go off the beaten path, and most of the things outside of the town lead into some of the bigger machinations and quests going on here.
So the cool thing about chapter 2 is that there's a bunch of, this is like an upgraded chapter 1, right? It's the same sort of structure. You've got a bunch of,
it's a sandbox,
quests or hooks and places to go, and your players are going to start getting hints and tips. And what's a little bit, I actually like that this adventure doesn't start with, here's the big boss, but first you got to kill a bunch of rats. So I like that chapter 1 doesn't really like have any like necessarily huge connections to the overarching plot. However, that is sort of an issue. You might be wondering, your players might be wondering, like, what the fuck are we doing here? Chapter 2 is starting to tie into the larger issues, right? You're going to run into Aurel's servants. You're going to start to meet the people that come up in later chapters. You're going to start to see the sort of the greater structure of the book. However, yeah.
However, this one, in my opinion, suffers from some of the same presentation issues of that sandbox that chapter 1 has. Just as you've got an encounter table, that's great. You're given, and am I being too much of a pedant here, Rob, is that your quest table is the tall tales in the 10 towns. But none of these are tall tales. They're just quest opportunities. They're not legendary yarns that people spin as a storytelling activity around the fire. They're just quest rumors. They're not tall tales.
Matt, you are correct. That's not pedantry. They're not tall tales. They are true. However, I have a lot of respect for the
alliteration,
consonation, alliteration of tall tales in 10 towns. So I'm gonna let it slide. You're, however, correct. This is another place where I really appreciate
technically correct, the best kind of correct.
I like the clever writing, and I'm going to overlook it. But yeah, so you've basically got, what is it, 10 again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, actually, there's 12.
12?
You've got 12 basically rumors or hooks, and I, like Matt, would kind of actually have liked them to be a little bit more rumory and not just, here's a thing, and then it's exactly what they say the thing is. But whatever.
Yeah.
So your players can then, and these are good hooks, by the way. I do want to say that these are good, interesting quests, and if I were a player, I'd be like, hell yeah, let's go look for Angajuk's Bell, or let's go and check out Jarlmut, or, I need to know more about this crashed spaceship. But
oh yeah, Spelljammer, baby.
Yeah, we got to talk about
the floor plan's a little off according to original. We're missing a deck, but that's okay. I'll let it slide.
But the problem is that there's no reason for your players specifically to do any of these things, like
other than they're adventurers, right?
Right.
And now we're back to the basic problem of setting up a session 0 for this, and the adventure is written so that it's for people who just want to be adventurers, right? Who want to maybe help the 10 towns acquire treasure and power, and that's fine for the default Dungeons and Dragons game stuff. But like, I just want like some advice on maybe a little more about what your player's purpose is, right?
Yeah, and an experienced dungeon master can totally do this. And also, your players might just love it, but it is kind of
I don't think you or I would have a problem
No,
with this.
but it is kind of
worry about
it is kind of a problem that there is no
babies,
guidance here. Like
though.
the thing is, if again, your players should not be pains in the ass about this. However, if you ask yourself or your players ask you, like, why are we doing this? Why do we care? There should be an answer. And aside from there might be loot there or there's a bad guy, there's not any particular reason why they might go to any individual place. Once they're there, a lot of these start to, again, have hooks and play into later developments. But their reason for going there is mostly somebody asked them to, or somebody mentioned it in passing. And that's a problem for me, right? You again, just from like a sort of a verisimilitude standpoint, there should be a reason, right? There should be a point, right? You should be able to say, all right, let's pretend that my players are huge assholes, and they're like, well, why do I care about this? You should have an answer, right? And there is no real answer here. Yeah.
This is not just, us being like assuming that our players are stupid asshole murder hobos. I feel like if you assume that players are assholes and you still give them a really good reason to connect things, then the players who are not assholes have an even better reason to do things.
Right,
and even
right.
more investment. My other critique about the connective tissue is it's almost exclusively done in an NPC telling someone, and there are lots of other ways to create connective tissue, right? Through stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Things and the physical reality of the world instead of someone yelling at them.
Yeah. So let's talk about what's specifically in this. We didn't go over each of the 10 quests in Chapter 1 because we didn't have time, but I don't think we're going to have time to go over each of these. But there's a few that I really do want to talk about because some of them are awesome. And if you were going to steal any of these sections or these quests or anything from this book, each of these totally awesome, could be borrowed for all sorts of other adventures. What I think we're both going to have same favorite, but let's talk about
okay.
Let's talk about
what's your first favorite.
Well, I mean, my first favorite is obviously id Ascendant, the one with the crashed spaceship. But I also I'm a big fan of the awakened sperm whale. I'm a big fan of that.
Yes.
And
I like the black cabin is one I would put on there.
Honestly, there's not really any that
but I have some problems.
There's not really any that I don't like. I guess I'm not super interested in the tribal camp. I really like the Lost Spire, which is basically just a very cool mini dungeon. It is like a broken chunk of a Netherese
a
city.
city the players will go to later.
Yeah, I'm actually this is close to my favorite. I love it. I would steal this dungeon for any number of other things. I also really liked the two sort of Goliath, what are they called? Settlements. You have to sort of like make peace between them, and this is not something that can be solved by murdering anybody, right? Your players have to talk to people, and they have to like sort of work out a an agreement between two camps of Goliaths that hate each other, and it's not like impossible to do, but you have to have players that are willing to role play and willing to talk to people. And I think it's a really, these quests are hard to write, to be honest. And I know why adventure writers tend to prefer to just create a dungeon full of monsters. I know I do sometimes. It's much simpler, but a really interesting, well-designed social quest is a lot of fun for me. And I thought this one was very interesting. I was a big fan of this.
I was a big fan of the Black Cabin, which is very much a scary cabin in the woods inhabited by a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
It was close to something I would steal. There's an artifact there that the ghost was trying to make to counteract Arl's endless night that could explode and blow the players up and turn them into ghosts, which was cool. But then if the players like fix the artifact and stuff, it doesn't solve the problem, which made me a little mad. I was like, it casts control weather once. So
yeah, this is something we've alluded to but haven't talked about in detail, and we will at some point. But this is a scary and often dark book in a good way.
And
I really
often
like
very
it.
deadly.
And
there are not a lot of easy encounters.
There are not. And this is, I think this is a challenge. You have to sort of like craft the atmosphere, but if you do, this is a really like cool like horror survival type of game. And what I really like about this book, one of my favorite things, is that there are several dungeons or settings that are quite creepy and evocative. The Black Cabin is one. Another section here, the Cackling Chasm, is also like pretty like freaky. The Nautiloid that we're going to talk about in just a minute, it can be real scary. And then there's a section later on that we'll talk about in greater detail, where there's more like Knoll horror stuff going on. I'm a big fan of, but this is well done. I really liked the horror elements of this book. That was a clearly like intended as they wrote it, and there's definitely some well written horror survival, echoes of The Thing, of 30 Days of Night, of Alien, of any number of quite scary movies and properties. But let's talk about what was my favorite, and
okay.
I imagine was your favorite.
Yes, absolutely.
The crashed Nautiloid, and
there's a lot of fun ways to hook players into this one, including them meeting psychics like throughout the 10 towns who are like going crazy,
or just hearing the message themselves. Hearing
the message themselves. Right. This would be great if you could give the players a secret that is they are psychic, and once per day they can hear someone's thoughts for 30 seconds or something.
Yeah.
But
there's also this is also well integrated. Again, this is frustrating. Somebody needs to make a flow chart. I don't know. Maybe it'll be us.
Right. I just need a flow chart, because I'm always gonna forget to put in.
There's like
the
another again. This is just sort of like offhand, but in another adventure, you meet a giant, and the giant is carrying a basket of like weird metal, which is from. It's like space metal from this crashed Nautiloid. That's cool. That's a nice connective tissue. And I think this stuff is all over the book, but like, unless you like,
it was presented terribly.
Unless you read really carefully and take a ton of notes, you're not going to be able to do a good job of stitching this all together.
You need a 4x6 bit of corkboard and about 100 yards of red string, so that you can plot this out, and I'm sure someone will do it for you.
Yeah, somebody will do it
on the internet. But I just would like a simple flow chart of like what connects.
Well, and we didn't even talk about this either.
Something.
But like this is again,
it's good adventure writing to have all this connective tissue. It's so hard to get together. No, so there needs to be one map of Icewind Dale that shows the location of every quest, and hopefully has hexes on it at a very minimum for the dungeon master to try and like plot things out and keep the players interested in the next thing.
Anyway, so so let's talk about this. This is great. So if you listen to our last episode, we talked at length about Spelljammer, one of our favorite settings, which includes, as a central part of it, illithids in spaceships, specifically Nautilus-shaped ones called Nautiloids. And you know what? We griped about how Wizards wasn't including this amazing weirdness in their adventures, and you know what? They did. There is a crashed Nautiloid in Icewind Dale. Now, they have said in the adventure that it is for traveling through the astral plane, not traveling between crystal spheres, but whatever.
Yeah, I'm very mad about that.
Whatever.
They need to get back to the astral plane? No, they don't.
Whatever. Here's what's great. Again, there are some really good. I actually think, like I said, I don't think there are any stinkers. This one is great because it is weird and scary and also potentially funny. The Illithids in this are gnomes. And they're gnome Illithids, and there's some great art of the gnome. What are they called? Gnome Squidlings. That's right.
Now, this is so cool and cute. I will forgive the fact that under the lore, it doesn't matter what the species undergoes seromorphism. They all look the same. Whatever.
It's fine.
It's cute.
There's these tiny gnome Illithids that have laser guns.
Laser rifles.
They got laser rifles and laser pistols, and then there's these adorable, horrifying gnome squidlings, which are like fucked up, Illithid aberrations that like failed their seromorphosis, and they're in this crash ship and they're trying to escape back to the astral plane. And what's great is that they want to work with you, and you can help them. There's a psi crystal that you can find elsewhere to help them get home. You could walk away with all sorts of goodies, including laser rifles, or
there's only one that works, but yeah.
Or you can stumble like a dumbass into the Nautiloid and fight two, Illithids and a bunch of squidlings and also some other monsters.
Plenty of other monsters.
Both are entirely viable, but I love the idea that if you approach carefully and, are smart about this, that you could, make friends with these, adorable, horrifying gnome Illithids and help them, escape Icewind Dale. This is just like
probably an evil thing to do.
Oh yeah,
it says
they're
explicitly
bad.
They're
eat brains.
out there to
yeah.
catch slaves and eat brains and specimens. So maybe you shouldn't help them, but you could.
Yeah, you could.
You could trade them for some laser rifles.
And then
I
I love that there's like multiple ways to approach this. This is just like a very well written individual adventure. I would steal this. You could steal this and use this anywhere.
Right. Crash Nautiloid, always a good one. The one thing that made me mad was it very explicitly says in the rules that the players have no way of ever getting it to fly on their own. Which why do that to your players? I guess I'm sure someone was like, well, we can't have this because then the players can get around too quickly. But I don't know.
Here's what I would do.
Really going to do that to
Here's
people?
what I would do about that is I would leave that out, and I would say some artifact or object from Yithrin, from the final section, is what they need to get this working again if they choose to do so. And then, at the end of the adventure, you could use this Nautiloid as a launching for perhaps a Spelljammer campaign, or for just, something else.
Or so that players can go quickly between Icewind Dale, Luskin, and the other cities of the Lord's Alliance because they did that prison break and they know they're all up to something.
My favorite part of this, not my favorite part, one of my favorite parts of this is that at the end, whatever happens, you leave the Nautiloid, and even if you made friends with the Illithids, they released a Bulette into the wild and forgot about it, and then it just attacks you. It just tries to kill you as you're leaving. Matt and I love Bulettes. This is great. All right, so chapter 2. Anything else that we want to talk about? There's a bunch of these that are really good.
Again, chapter 2. If Icewind Dale didn't just have the locations of things, if it had it on a hex map with it just giving a dungeon master a hex map is great because then you should think of what things from nothing to your own adventures should go in every hex, right?
Yeah.
And it's a missed opportunity. Obviously you can do it by plopping a hex transparency over this, but it's a different design philosophy, and I know Wizards did the hex map back with Tomb of Annihilation, but I think it's one that is entirely appropriate to getting players to think about the sandbox that is Icewind Dale.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, not sorry, listeners. This is going to have to be a two-parter. That we have only gotten through the first 2 chapters, and that was with kind of skipping over some things that I wanted to talk about. And there's a lot that I want to talk about in the next. There are let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 more chapters, not counting the.
And this is an appropriate stopping section, though, because the adventure takes sort of a hard turn after chapter 2. The final chapters are all kind of longer, more specific quests that are less sandboxy, but I think are all built on the sandbox your players have been exploring in a very elegant way. Something we'll have to talk more about next.
We'll talk more about this in detail, but I'm a big fan of the rest of the chapters, but they are a distinct departure from the first 2. They are less sandboxy, but they, if you have run, and this is the issue, if you've run the first 2 chapters well, they will tie together very, very elegantly, like Matt said. But this is a big lift for the DM, and this is I think here's my like midway observation is that this is a good book. I like it a lot. The biggest problem is that it's a huge lift for the DM. I can see how I'd run this. I know how you would run this. I can totally see tying all these things together. But I would want to do a ton of like charting and my cork board and write up some other things and change some quests, because you can see how they are sort of supposed to work together, but as written, they don't really. Sometimes they do, but in general, right, broadly, they just don't.
Yeah. In the first half of this, our real critique is not even in the connective tissue. There is some good connective tissue. It's the way the sandbox is presented to the Dungeon Master. And if you've never run a sandboxy adventure before of here's a location full of fantastical challenges and NPCs and dungeons and politics of the towns for your players to explore for several months of gameplay, right? If that's presented to you and you've never run an adventure like this before, the advice and the connective tissue given to you in the book is pretty shit. However, the stuff is great. The sandbox is great. The advice for getting around the sandbox is not great.
Well, and Matt and I think it may sound like we've been griping a lot about this and we have a lot of problems with it, but also we spent already an hour talking about just like the first 2 parts of this book. And I think that's a real strong recommendation for this book. I honestly, this is one of maybe like my favorite. I think it is my favorite adventure that Wizards has published for 5th edition.
And for people who are not planning on running a published module, I think it might be my favorite one for stealing. Because there are so many small things.
Yes. I think that I think that any dungeon master who plans to run anything in 5th edition, even if it's not this full adventure, would get a lot out of this book. I think that it's really worthwhile. So we'll be back with a review of the second part. Any final thoughts on this, Matt? I think we've said all that we need to say about it to begin with.
Is top notch. Well done.
Oh, it's so good. Good.
Yeah.
Really good.
So I think that's my final thought.
It's a good book. It's exciting. I loved reading it. I had a lot of fun talking about it. So if you're interested, definitely check this out.
We'll
and
see you
stay tuned
under
for
the ice.
part 2 of Rime of the Frostmaiden.
We're getting real now.
Keep rolling them dice.